welcome back to 3 Years LLB YouTube channel. I think we've come a long way in our journey from guiding Rishabh to actually interviewing him, and he's currently first year NLS. So a proud moment for us as well. Welcome, Rishabh. Thank you so much for your time. I understand the trimester system at NLS, it becomes super difficult and it's super hectic for you guys. So thanks for sparing time for your juniors. Again, we'll keep the session super interactive and super informative for all our participants. And very organic. We'll discuss NLSAT 2026 is exactly a month from here. It's on 26th of April, 2026. So of course, a lot of students are super anxious, what to do, what next, etc. So we'll discuss all of that in super detail. And again, thank you so much. And on that note, let's just start with a brief introduction of yours, your journey, how's life at NLS so far, how is it going, everything.
Um, well, thank you, ma'am, for having me here. Of course, I've held webinars for LegalEdge before. I'm glad to be here. And of course, I'm glad that I could get this opportunity to help my juniors and help fellow aspirants prepare for this examination. Uh, I'm up close to finishing my first year now. We're in the last trimester, third trimester of this year, and it's been super hectic. And yes, I think the exam more or less gives you a brief glimpse of what life at NLS is going to be like. Again, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I think it's anybody who can do their best and get into this institution, it's absolutely worth it. Um, on myself, I'm Rishabh Maiti. This is the time around the same time last year when I was giving NLSAT 2025. I took a gap year because I graduated with a background in economics. I was in SRCC and I graduated in 2024. And around the time I was graduating, I was really looking to get into more of quantitative roles and policy roles. But uh, based on the end of my internships in my third year, I realized that maybe I was not interested in a career in like investment banking and straight quant finances, and I grew quite tired of like strictly quantitative modeling roles and so on. So I had already by that time I'd already applied to a bunch of masters institutions and gotten a few admits. I decided that I was not going to take admissions in those institutions abroad, and I started to prepare for the NLSAT around 2 months prior to the exam in 2024. I think primarily because I was coming from a very quantitative degree with not a lot, like a very heavy reading background. So for me, my weakness and my weak spot into the 2024 attempt was probably current affairs. And in the 2024 attempt, I got the All India rank 321, and I was not able to make it. So then I just had to make the decision of whether I'm going to get a job or going to my master's programs or give it another year. I decided to give it another year, and that was right around the time, I think 2025 was also the first year, was LegalEdge was coming out with the mocks and the preparation program for the NLSAT, which I took. And yeah, I was able to prepare. I decided to take a drop here. I did do a bunch of part-time internship work and research work along with my preparation, but I was able to consistently give a few hours a day. And throughout my year of preparation in 2025, I finally gave the exam and got an all India rank of 37, and I was able to get in. Um, Again, I'm really happy to be here, and I think we can move forward with the session.
So giving this interview, you're at NLS, right? So yeah, must be an amazing feeling. So it's good to see your students in your dream law schools. I think that's the kind of motivation that we also need to keep going. On that note, let's start off, address the burning question. 30 days from here, all students are panicking, and I think one question that keeps troubling them that what if they do not make it to the dream law school and it's at a super competitive, limited seats, and one key thing. So I suggest all my students that each time you think that what if you don't, just once think about what if you will. I think that's the kind of mindset that changes everything. So one tip to which kept you going and deal with a lot of self-doubt and last minute jitters.
I just like to reference this by saying that me and all of our peers, absolutely none of us were sure that we are going to make it, and we are all here. So it's completely okay to feel that you're not prepared enough, or that there are other people that are better than you, or that the exam, even after post the exam, that your attempt didn't go too well. But everyone feels that way. Everyone's at the same level playing field, and nobody really um has a absolute perfect year of preparation where they dedicatedly gave 10 hours a day of prep despite taking a gap year. So don't worry, even if you're at this even if there's 30 days from the examination, I believe that if you really, really focus on the way the exam is structured and the way questions are phrased, and like really focus more on the paper analysis rather than like trying to just like comprehensively go about start your preparation. If you do a really focused attempt at this examination, even within 30 days, I think it is a pretty crackable exam. So you, even if you're starting from base zero, I think it's very doable, and everyone else is feeling the same way as you.
Fair enough. I want all participants to actually take note that mindset plays a huge role. So till the day of the examination, don't give up, don't quit, and continue to work super, super hard. Which brings me to my next question. How should the next 30 days look like for NLSAT aspirants?
Um, I think, there would be different levels of individuals who are like at different stages of their preparation at this point. Of course, for people who have been preparing for a long time, it's all about revision and consistency. But for most individuals, and if you just recently started with your prep, or if you also that if you're not super sure on your prep, or you're a bit behind on your prep and you're not scoring really well on marks, the first thing to do, as soon as possible, within a day or two, would be to take a diagnostic test. Now, that if you have access to mocks and LegalEdge mocks, that would be taking an All India mock or a LegalEdge mock would be an excellent point in getting your score as soon as possible. Other than that, you can also, if you don't have access to these mocks, you can probably attempt the past year question paper and see where you currently stand at. I think every individual within their preparation, nobody's good at everything. So people have some weaknesses. And regarding part A specifically, most questions and most mistakes are of basically three primary categories. A, that you didn't know the answer. And that's usually like with regards to current affairs, that there was simply a lack of knowledge. B, regarding RC and CR, that you thought that something was the answer, but it wasn't. And that's usually primarily because either students gloss over the answers in the NLSAT exam, which
Conceptual miss, basically.
either a conceptual miss or a miss in referencing back to the page in
Pages.
hurry. So, like trying to find the right answer and so on. And thirdly, about time management, that you couldn't complete the paper, or you had to rush through, or you had to like, you couldn't really give the time required to the questions, especially part A, because you had to move on to part B. Um, Try to give a mock, a diagnostic test, and get your part, especially for your part A, because your part B feedback, if even if you're getting from LegalEdge, or you're getting it from another supervisor or mentor of yours, it's going to take a day or two to arrive. For your part A, try to see where most of your errors are lining up. If it's regarding a lack of static knowledge and lack of current affairs, where you really need to ramp up your general current affairs. If you know it's regarding either conceptual clarity, or like going back to it, and just like attrition regarding your reading speed wasn't long enough, or you got tired, or your attention span gave up in the middle of the passage, and then hence you just like overlooked an answer. You need to work on RC and specifically get used to reading as much as possible in the exact pattern that NLSAT prescribes to you, which is a lot longer than what most other examinations such as CAT and GMAT give you. The passage length is quite long, and the types of questions in and of itself, whether they're like inference, assumptions, strength and weaken, what is the meaning in context, not necessarily what is like the vocab meaning of the word memorized from the dictionary, but what does the author mean here? What is the author's central arguments? All of these core basics, if you're missing out on them, make sure to like clear your fundamentals as soon as possible. Lastly, regarding time management is, especially in part A, is mostly attributed to reading speed, which again, I think fundamentally all three of these can be best worked out by giving as many mocks as possible. Given that specificity is very important, this exam is a bit different from all the other exams like MHCET and CUET-PG, which are strictly MCQ based examinations. So here we are trying to give as many exam specific mocks as possible, possibly one every other day, and analyzing your mistakes seeing where you lie at is the first step to like start with your 30-day preparation in and of itself, get access to mocks, and start with a diagnostic mock and make a habit of giving as many mocks as possible.
I'm completely aligned with it. Just to add a little context to it, so I think all students, regardless of where they are in terms of their preparation, of course, if you've been preparing for a year, if you've been preparing for 6 months, 8 months, of course, always an edge to start early because a lot of pressure is off your shoulder, and you can work on your concepts, fundamentals, and then slowly pick up practice for part A and part B. But regardless of wherever you are in terms of your preparation, in the next month, taking mocks is non-negotiable, and students should attempt like 2 to 3 mocks in a week, analyze them. So even if you're just starting off with your preparation, you just feel like you want to take an attempt at NLSAT, just solve a lot of mocks and try solving mocks offline, because it's a very different experience to take that mock offline. Your reading speed varies when you're reading something online versus when you're reading something on paper. Plus, for all participants, you get a booklet and you're constrained by space for part B in that booklet. You're supposed to finish your answers within that given space. And those are unruled sheets. If you're not accustomed to writing on unruled sheets, you will struggle on the day of your examination. Your sentences won't be straight, there won't be correct paragraph spacing, line spacing, etc. Plus, you also need to factor in the time that it takes to fill the OMR. 5 7 minutes,
Absolutely.
yes, 5 7 minutes. We aren't really accustomed to filling the OMR, so that's a pressure that what if I mark and I mark the bubble incorrect, I'll get a negative. So that you, if at all the OMR marking takes 5 minutes, under pressure you'll end up taking more time. So essentially, it's not 150 minutes, but just say you have 140 minutes to finish your paper. The 10 marks should be 10 marks should be reserved for coming back to any question that you've reserved that I need to review it once, your OM filling those bubbles, etc. Thus, taking mocks becomes super, super important because they give you a real assessment of time management. Taking it online or taking it half-heartedly, and I've seen a lot of students actually take part A and part B separately. So, like they've given part
Mm.
A, then they'll submit part B answers later. I think that's another injustice that they do to their preparation, because they will never be able to develop the right sense of how much time that they're taking to complete the paper. And I think Rishabh fairly highlighted that take offline mocks. And we have another All India NLSAT open mock on 5th of April in 7 cities. So details of it are already out. So we request all participants to register for it. Test yourself, and again, mocks don't just test you; they train you. So all your weak areas, analyze them. All your weak areas, practice a lot of questions, and Rishabh, which brings me like a very important question. So with current affairs, so while your last month should essentially be dedicated to solving a lot of mocks and analyzing them, one crucial aspect is revising a lot of current affairs. And NLS and NLSAT as a paper expects you to be generally aware. So current affairs of like not just the past year, but anything which has happened of national and international significance in the last 2 to 3 years. So how should students essentially structure their revision and preparation of current affairs?
Um, so firstly, I'll start about if students have not studied current affairs or don't have a base as of now, and then I can talk about just if you just have to revise necessarily. The NLSAT again tests very contemporary current affairs. Usually, the way it will be structured is that the topic in and of itself will be something that's relevant to the last 8 to 12 months. But within that topic, then there might be static history that could extend anywhere back to 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or even the conception of whatever that topic is. A preliminary analysis of like past year question papers is like super important. And you can any student can highlight a bunch of central themes that the NLSAT really likes to ask on. That is at least all major legislations and acts that are released. Secondly, on any like contemporary issue, like social issue, something that's been in the headlines, something related to activism, on the medical profession, on the constituent assembly, on AI. All of these are like really hot topics that are usually in editorials, and NLSAT likes to ask a lot about them. Also, something regarding pop culture, which was not so much in 2025, but 24, 23
And
papers, and
yes,
NLSAT was even questioning on pop cultures and so. Um, The quickest way to, firstly, like, do not, for the sake of GK, do not compromise on mock giving, because when you're attempting the mock in and of itself, you'll go through a lot of passages that are going to be relevant. Mocks are structured in a way that they highlight important topics. And within, when you're analyzing and you missed out on the questions, learning those questions is super important. So instead of like trying to go for whether I've covered everything important about in the month of March and April and May and June, students should first prioritize making sure that the mocks that they're giving, they're able to go ahead and thoroughly familiarize with themselves with the GK section and learn all the questions that they're getting wrong, because the mocks again focus on the highlighted sections in and of itself. Other than that, what I did personally was that LegalEdge used to come up with two major monthly recaps. That is, a monthly current affairs and secondly monthly legal affairs. These are usually like anywhere from I think 1 to 3 hours. The longest one being 2 to 3 hours or so. But these are like 1 hour section. So I used to just make sure that regarding at least the top 10 or 15 important topics from each month, I'm covering both the current affairs as well as the current legal affairs, the legislations, and the bills that have been passed or discussed. Um, Thirdly, it's super important if you really, really are emphasizing that from the month of October onwards, really has asked questions anywhere from even within the previous year of May and June. So it doesn't really discriminate a lot. But if you only have to prioritize, emphasize much more on the month of October to anyway October to March, which in and of itself like try to focus much more and cover all the comprehensive developments there. At this stage, it's not really super helpful to read the newspaper. So don't really like try to read the newspaper to generate a reading habit. I think you'll do that much better by attempting actual mocks. Try to get a good compendium that could be clat post or something. If you think you can cover compendiums, if you think your reading speed is reasonable enough and your preparation is at a point where you can actually cover compendiums like the clat post, try to give each and every
Have a dedicated magazine for the 3 years category by the name Bulletin.
Oh, but that's excellent then. Bulletin. So then try to cover that compendium. You could probably give every month's compendium about 3 to 4 days according to the current timeline if you want to thoroughly prepare yourself. But make sure to at least go through the legal revision videos that Legal Edge posts and on each month. And make sure at least all the major themes and passages in major international awards and even your static is clear that the United Nations, major international bodies, major international awards, the Nobel Prizes, the Oscars, like the sports awards, and so on. Make sure that your static and your basics are clear on that. I think in and of itself, the exercise of going through every month's legal and as well as now normal current affairs should help you be able to do that. After you've done realistically speaking, if you're covering 12 months worth of GK, if you give every single month's GK about 2 days, you should be able to cover. And if you're prioritizing 8 months worth of GK, then at max give every month's worth of GK 3 days. But make sure you thoroughly prepare yourself. If your GK is weak, if you already have a reading habit and you're generally aware, you could probably get off by giving current affairs and GK about 1.5 hours to 2 hours apart from your mock time. But if your GK is really weak, really try to push and give as much time as possible apart from a mock and analysis, because part A is really like the score, really the section where you can maximize your score. In other questions, you can like current affairs and reading comprehension, you can still make inferences, and there is a likely chance that you will get some of the questions right. In GK, it's either you know it or you don't, and
Don't.
the probability of just getting it right is 1/4, which is quite low. So make sure to maximize and push as much on GK. NLSAT asks very relevant and contemporary GK. It doesn't really like test you on very obscure GK that some of the other examinations do. So I think going through the strategy, you should be able to cover more than enough. If you're just revising, make sure to instead of just like revising by and via notes, try to actually find mocks where whatever topic you're revising on, that mock has tested you on that topic. Or try to like, even if you just have a topic, you can just use AI and try to generate question prompts and passages, because it's important that when people like just recall static GK, they recall it in a specific way, in a specific order. And when the question asks you something out of like something very niche, from the entire repository of knowledge that you probably would have memorized, it's difficult to recall it at that very specific moment. So exam practice is quite important. Yeah.
Uh, I 100% agree. And I think very relevant point that you highlighted, the GK isn't obscure, the exact term that you use. And the questions asked, they're super relevant, contemporary, and burning socio-political issues which being debated and have the potential to shape the legal landscape, how the perspectives, approach, etc. And ideally, that's how your preparation should look like. You should prioritize the first 6 months first, the past 6 months first, then like the 8 months, 10 months, and then the past year. And I think all students, while they are actually revising whatever is in the current realm, they should essentially pick up the backdated story as well. So, for instance, if the transgender bill it's being debated and the proposed amendments, ideally you should look at which section, when was it introduced, what was the intention, agenda, purpose, and I think that's how your holistic GK preparation looks like. Uh, okay, you also highlighted one very interesting point, which was part A is uh, part A is where you maximize your scores because after a point in time you will saturate, and part B is a subjective paper, and you won't be able to push yourself beyond a certain threshold. Let's just say you push yourself like a 50, 55, but it's a subjective paper, and the likelihood of you getting full marks for your case studies, if case study is 12 marks, the likelihood of you getting a 12 out of 12 is super low. Subjective paper, you're usually not given complete marks um, for an answer. So your marks will saturate after a point in time. On the contrary, part A is where you can maximize your scores because it's an objective paper, MCQ. So you either get it correct or you either get it wrong. I've seen this a lot of students make this mistake wherein since answer writing is a completely different skill, they put in a lot of time, effort, energy, mastering that skill and not giving enough weightage or attention to part A. Anything that you want to add on this?
Absolutely, ma'am. I think based on my batch in and of itself and also my previous experience. Firstly, in 2024, when I gave it and I got All India rank 321, my Part B was still not checked. So it's very important to understand that Part A is itself a qualifier. If even if you're excelling and you are the best answer writer in the world, if your Part A doesn't make the cut, which roughly should be around 300 top 300 answers in Part A scores. But now that I think more people are giving the examination this year, it might be the top 400 or 500 answers. It's a 75th percentile. You need to make that part A score cutoff for your part B to get checked. Secondly, the way our professors mark the questions, it's a similar marking scheme as most legal answers in examinations, even internally in LS are marked. That is to say, I expect that around 70 to 80% of a score in a question, that is, let's say, are out of 12, if a legal question you're attempting, if you're getting 8 to 9 marks, that means you've done everything excellently and you've not
Good
missed
score.
out on anything.
Yes.
That's probably the best score you could get. 10 at max, but like 8 to 9 is a very, very good score to get. That means even within my batch, a score analysis, like the All India rank one, that was Ramsha, got 106. And I think her part A score was around 64, 65-ish out of 75, which is where she really maximized. Even amongst the rest of us that have a more of an even distribution, for me, my part B score was 44, which was relatively on the like on the
Upper
higher
end.
end,
Yes.
upper end. So you even if you write amazing answers, the return on your effort is just not going to be worth it, both in terms of time as well as like examination time. That is the amount of time you give to the answer itself within your 2.5 hours, as well as the amount of time you're going to prepare and like practice part B answers to get that to get that skill to write that answer in the first place. So, and I would say anything above like in real terms, in your mocks, you should try to, of course, aim for 50, 55, as high as you can. In the real examination, anything above 40 would be a good score, given that we are expecting like anything about 100, would be a slightly safer score to attempt for. So try to maximize your score at like easily cross 60 if you can on consistently on mocks. So that way you know that your part B, if it's say stable and secure, you're getting 40 plus in the NLSAT in your part B, which is again a decent score to get. you're able to still make it. Most students who did make it to the exam did the exact same thing. Most of the part A's were relatively high in the 60s, and then the part B's range from anywhere from 35 to 48 or 49. So that's
Any
that's the
score
distribution. Yeah.
any score above 60 in part A puts you in a very comfortable position, so that even because of any XYZ reason, we're talking about six answers to write, out of which one is an analytical essay that demands in-depth knowledge, understanding references. So even if you're not scoring on the higher side in part B, you still be in a very comfortable position to make it to NLS. So I think keynote for all participants that try and maximize your scores. All mocks that you're giving, you should target like a 62, 65. And on the day of the examination, the more you can maximize here, the higher the chances of you making it to NLS. Great. The next question, the more subject specific. So NLSAT Part E is primarily English, CR, and GK. We've discussed GK at length. Specific tips for English and CR. How did your day look like in the last 30 days? How did you prioritize English and GK? Because there's an overlap. There's an overlap. There isn't a clear, very strict bifurcation. There is, but more or less like an overlap. So how did your English and CR preparation look like in the last 30 days?
Um, I would say at the NLSAT examination, both in terms of firstly, as we already talked about, in terms of length, it's a lot longer than other examinations, but also in terms of like the depth of questions and the sources they're using. So they frequently use like editorial sources as well as like international journals, fiction from South Asian authors, and so on. And often like the not only the level of vocabulary, but also like the sentence structures are complex. They often involve very long sentences and so on. So I was trying to make sure that I practice a lot of hard reading. For me, that was primarily through mocks because the mocks itself then they replicated the question prompt. Like reading speed is one of the most important things in determination of the examination. So make sure firstly your reading speed is at point. If not, mocks is the best way. Don't start reading fiction, novel, or newspapers at this point. That's not going to be super helpful or the most efficient use of your time. Secondly, regarding RC and CR, as Kajal Ma'am already said, it's a bit joined and it's also difficult to bifurcate whether this question is CR or RC in the exam. But NLSAT has consistently followed a question like similar question types throughout the examination. Of course, these question types differ from again what you would encounter on GMAT and like LSAT India or even CAT. These questions, make sure you know all the question types. One of them is like, let's say, inference. What can be validly inferred? Make sure you know how to find out the author's view,
Awesome.
whether the author agrees or disagrees, and the different tones of the author, whether what like critical is like separate from being, let's say, enthusiastic or separate from being skeptical. So what's the difference between being skeptical and being critical and critiquing and being positive? So different adjectives and how the author would necessarily relate to one. What strengthens and weakens, and in terms of strengthens and weakens, again, the options that are usually presented to you would not be so easy as to make it so that one of the answers is clearly like making the answer like make strengthening the
Obvious.
author's
It's not that
argument.
obvious.
A lot of them would be questions or would be options that necessarily to some degree or to some extent, all of them strengthen the author's argument. So the correct answer and the question is usually phrased as which of these, if true, would most strengthen the author's argument. So the correct answer is always the one that makes the author's conclusion most likely or most probable versus if it's which would most weaken the argument. So it's usually the option which would make the author's conclusion least likely to occur or happen. So try to work on complex questions with options that challenge you, try to like make you think. Assumption identification that X's argumentation depends on which of these following assumptions. Of course, all of these are also premised on fundamentals of critical reasoning and reading comprehension. If you have the time to go through that, that's well and good. However, try to like just make sure that you know you're familiar with the question types, you're not encountering them for the first time in the exam, and that you've practiced them before. Another particular type of answer, the question that I think is unique to the NLSAT is analogy or parallel reasoning. That like it'll present you three or four different metaphors or analogies, and it'll say which of these following is most analogous to X's argument or the author's
Argument.
argument,
Yes.
which again is a very difficult question type to just attempt for the first time, if you especially if you haven't practiced it. It could be you should know the meaning of like a counterfactual or a world where if author's assumptions didn't have take place, what would happen? Because some of the questions I've tested, if XYZ were true, which of the following, which of the others XYZs must be true.
Must be true.
So yeah,
A lot of
try to
assumption, parallel reasoning.
gap in arguments, necessary conditions. X's argument assumes which of the following, which is what is a necessary assumption versus which could just be like what is a implied thing or something like that. So again, the best way to go about it is NLSAT mocks. Try to familiarize yourself with the answer question types. In fact, what you can do is when you're analyzing the mocks, try to see what each question tested of you. Most people have some sort of patterns in critical reasoning, that they have problems with, let's say, assumption identification, or they have problems with contextual vocabulary. That a lot of people who just like broadly skim over the questions, what they're doing is they're often selecting the second best answer
Best
because
answer.
they're not really diving deep. So if you identify that pattern within yourself, that I'm like most of the answers that I was correct, but maybe this was a bit more precise. Try to identify those answers and which question types you fault on, and work on them proactively. Because now is 30 days is a limited time. You really need to target your preparation rather than just generally going about trying to prepare all sort of questions you're strong on, questions you're weak on, and so on.
Add to it a little that one way of actually going about, since these passages are dense and lengthy, and for a lot of participants, you can experiment with it, that you can read the questions first and then come to the passage. So you will have some understanding of the approach from which, the perspective from which you're supposed to read the passage. And that way, if something is, of course, it'll be a complex set of questions, but there is some question will be direct. So it'll be a lot easier for you to mark those questions directly. And then the complex one, you'll have the liberty to go through the passage again. You'll save time at that end. So first thing is this: practice a lot of question. And now is not the time to pick up newspapers or editorials to build a reading habit. Nevertheless, do expose yourself to diverse genre of reading. You need to expose yourself to philosophy, economics, finance, women rights, etc. High possibilities you're comfortable with one genre, but you'll struggle with another because of the vocabulary, since you've not really exposed yourself. So, of course, mocks are your primary sources, because we take note and we keep it in mind that with each mock, and these are like 8 passages, so you're getting exposed to different genres and you're testing yourself. Other than that, whatever time that all participants are spending reading, make it a point that you're reading abstract ideas, you're picking up complex vocabulary. Sites like Eon, Indian Express, these are interesting sites wherein you do get really good reads, and that's how you can build a vocabulary. But yeah, the perspective, the idea should be, the priority should be to first come up, solve mocks, and then whatever time that is left, you're exposing yourself to diverse genres. And then you can, of course, experiment with reading the questions first and coming to the passages. Which brings me to one question that I get asked a lot, is that these we're talking about 8 passages. So NLSAT as a paper is extremely reading intensive, that you have to read. And after a point in time, it's very human that you get zoned out. Might just happen like after the 4th passage or the 5th passage or the 3rd passage, and then you have to reread the same thing again. Happens with you and me while we're reading, and we've been continuously reading. What did you do to overcome this limitation so that you remain focused till the very 8th passage in the last question, and in fact, including part B, analytical essay and case studies?
Ma'am, so I think student for the most important thing is to build stamina. Of course, there are different there are other strategies you could use if you lose focus. And if you lose focus, of course, switching between part A and part B is a valid strategy. I personally believe that for me, when I'm attempting part A, I'm trying to read through a lot of content. There's a particular kind of reasoning that's recall as well as just like going back and forth that I'm employing. Part B requires me to like be creative and to think and to then apply the facts. So I think it's just two different kinds of reasoning that are applied, and hence I believe it's much more efficient to just get through part A at once, then get to part B, because part B also requires a different kind of stamina. You'll be writing
Writing.
continuously. You'll be like thinking about it, and you'll just like have a lot less time on you to manage. The exam is coming closer. One of the best ways to develop stamina, A, is like practice as much as possible. Try to make sure that, like, as you had previously mentioned, that examination time, you don't get for the full 2.5 hours, which is the invigilator would always come to you at least twice in the examination, if not more. First, to check whether you have marked your question
Huh?
paper, your answer sheet, everything. Then, secondly, to apply a sticker and to sign the invigilate. So you easily lose out in like at least 3 to 4 minutes on that. And then, of course, you'd have to mark your own OMR, which could take anywhere from 6 to 10 or 12 minutes. So make sure that you're giving yourself 2 hours and anywhere from 2 hours, like 18 minutes to 20 minutes instead of the full 230. Um, if you do that, you'd also give yourself a bit more urgency. So you'd know that hey, you can't really like, you don't really have the time to just chill and relax and zone out. I think a lot of students just calculate, divide the number of questions by the total time they have, and then they think that, oh, I've done this question in a bit less time than I was expected, so I can like just like take the next one a bit easy. Don't do that. Secondly, before the examination, and this is especially like again, I this is also why I don't um suggest giving mocks every day, because even with a reading habit, you get fatigued if you're just comprehensively, densely reading new passages, especially if you're doing GK as well. You're already doing a bunch of reading on the side for GK. So don't give mocks every day. Try to structure your like preparation in a staggered manner, that one day is very reading intensive where you're giving the mock, learning a bunch of GK. The next day you're analyzing the mock. So just like trying to get through what's here did you miss on, and also like maybe revising the GK or trying to recall what you had learned the previous day. That helps pace like and just give students a bit of break, and also like really be consistent with their reading habit in the last one. Before the exam, the day before the exam, um, you may try to just like skim through your GK preparation and revise everything you've gotten, but please don't like attempt multiple mocks before the day of the examination trying to maximize your preparation. You will be fatigued, and it really try to get as much sleep as possible. The 2.5 hours at the day of the examination really requires you to be super well rested and not fatigued, and just like be in the right headspace.
And more so specifically, since the examination time, what is from 10 to 12:30, right? That's the official timings. And most of us generation, we're not really accustomed to say like getting up early, sleeping on time. So all participants accustom your body, set your body clock in a way, fine tune your body for so that your mind is super active in those hours. For a lot of us, it happens that we are not early risers, we are night owls. So we spend a lot of time reading, binge watching, and our minds are not as active as they are probably, say, like in the second half of the day, because that's how, even with college classes. So for each participant, it is super, super necessary that you take mocks in that designated stipulated time so that your mind is active. Otherwise, if your mind is not active in those hours, if you're not into a habit of working in those hours or taking mocks in those hours, you will always struggle.
Yes, ma'am. Two caveats that I'd also like to add. Just a few of my friends' experiences. Firstly, try to the exam center you get is variable. Some of them are excellent and have clocks on them, and like time management is really good, but some of them don't. So make sure that you always carry a
Carry an
analog
analog watch.
analog watch with yourself. Also, a lot of the fans in some rooms make noise. So you have to be like, you can't really give it in the most pristine, silent environments and then really be prepared for the exam center, which a lot of students will be like flipping their pages, rustling through. Even the invigilator might, some of the invigilators might repeatedly announce the time, 30 minutes to go, 25 minutes. So try to either like not give it in a closed room environment, just like in your house if there's uh, daily activities going, or maybe you can just like have a white noise or a student background noise. I know there are Spotify playlists that exist of just like exam center students jotting down their pencils and so on. Try to replicate those in conditions as soon as possible. And lastly, if you are not accustomed to like caffeine or energy bars, don't try to like have them just before the examination. A friend of mine had to just like exit the examination in between to go to a bathroom break, and you don't really get a lot of bathroom breaks in between the exam, just because he was trying to like maximize his alertness in the morning. So the best way is just give mocks in the morning and make a habit of it, and not like
Habit.
those
Primarily
yourself?
why I am I think I'm behind all my students' lives to attempt mocks offline. It's also because there's a lot of pressure when you're doing it offline. And as far as you're concerned about the time, so when you're appearing it online, you for all mocks you have a timer going on. So you're technically not looking at the watch again and again, and that pressure is off you to actually check the time because it's right in front of you. However, it'll vary once you have a physical paper in your hand and you have to keep checking it on your analog watch that okay, how much time. Plus, it's a very different mindset once you have to gauge that what time it is on an analog watch, how much time has passed, versus seeing it on the screen in terms of numbers. So, super important that each one of you write mocks or offline. Again, I'll reiterate, we're conducting an offline all India open mock on 5th, and we'll also figure out ways that you can write mocks offline. But for each one of you who do not really have access to such facility, take a print of the mock, try and have an environment as close to the exam as possible, and fill in the OMR. So you also have like a OMR copy available on your portals for all students who are not with LE can also download it free and take a print of the mock, attempt it, and so that you get a fair understanding of all those variables, the pressure, the OMR, the time, etc. Quickly, Rishabh will come to the much feared part B. Uh, the last 30 days, how would they be centered for how should they be utilized for practicing part B? Mocks is one part which we've discussed in detail. And just how we discussed sections like English, GK, and CR, anything which that particularly needs to be done for part B.
Yeah. Firstly, just a brief summary of general strategy to part B. Whatever mocks you're giving, you'd always either receive the best students' answers or the model answers. Try to make sure, just when you're analyzing the mocks, of every single argument you've missed, not only the major arguments you've missed, but if whatever you've phrased, even if it's exactly what the other, like the model answer says, whether it could be phrased in a better manner, whether you could have mentioned a bit more, whether you could have
Better
been a
vocab,
bit
better
more
sentence
be-
structure.
sentence structure. That's very important. I think just trying to emulate your answer as close to the model answer as possible consistently. If in the next 13 days, I think most people would be able to give around 14 to 15 mocks minimum. If every single answer they give, part B, is slightly closer to the model answers, with by the 15th mock, they'll already be a lot better. Secondly, try to like make sure that what you already have some sort of a strategy in mind. For some students, I think it's the IRAC framework. If you're using IRAC, just make sure that to understand the role of each component of
Better.
IRAC. That is issue reasoning, application, conclusion, right? Or issue rule, application, conclusion. The issue in and of itself is just a very brief statement to for the examiner to just to know that hey, this individual or this applicant understands the question. It's just a very precise identification of the rule at hand. You don't really need to get a lot into the issue. The rule itself again is the principle or the metric you're going to be using to evaluate. So your rule determines the entirety of your application because you're going to be applying the rule. So it's again, using this structure is just better for the evaluator to understand that this person is using the correct metrics to go ahead and identify the application. If your rule is wrong, then the evaluator can save a lot of time by finding out that, hey, there are structural faults within your application. Your application in and of itself is the most important part.
Important part.
It could like in a very rough manner, it could look like supporting arguments, counter arguments, and then like rebuttal or synthesis. Supporting arguments are obviously like two or three arguments. If you can give examples or evidence, pieces of facts that are already in your question prompt, try to do your best to do that. The NLSAT questions are all structured in a way in which they'll give you an issue or a dilemma or a dichotomy or a, like just like
I mean,
like a dispute.
the,
Yeah.
the legal principle is pretty much highlighted because that's what they're essentially testing you on, that how well can you apply this legal principle to a given factual matrix.
Yes, it's whether the legal principle applies, whether which in most scenarios it does, and how you apply it.
How
So
you
supporting
apply.
arguments would be your application. Try if you can always try to list a few counter arguments because the NLSAT questions again are structured in a way in which you can usually take either side. So there will always exist arguments for the other side as possible. So like whatever the most intuitive or most the strongest objection to your position is, try to address it don't strawman it, which is just assume that the other side
Assuming
doesn't exist.
exists.
And then, like, lastly, your rebuttal or synthesis, that why your position still holds true despite the counter argument. This could be a bit more nuanced. And this is really the part that they're looking forward to. It's an excellent way of demonstrating your application that, hey, not only have you identified why your intuitive arguments are true, but also why they weigh over the other side. Why, like,
I think that's
your
essentially what distinguishes a good answer from an extremely ordinary answer is when you actually rebut and what the case that you've built for your side, the side that you chose, you're actually giving counter arguments, rebuttals to debase the other side's case as well. That essentially what distinguishes a good answer from an extremely ordinary answer. Another very important question, Rishabh, that again, in your answer sheets, did you highlight the components separately, like a issue, rule, application, conclusion, or for you it was more like a continuous passage with relevant and necessary paragraph breaks?
So, ma'am, I tried to follow a continuous passage structure. The thing is, I roughly followed Iraq. I didn't exactly have Iraq in mind. That I didn't strictly. It was a bit more context dependent on based on the question, because
Yes,
for some questions the issue was itself given in the question itself, that you are to determine whether this XYZ is guilty of
this
XZ or
or
not.
not.
In those questions, I thought it was just repetitive to mention the issue again. Um, I didn't flag post the rule, application, and conclusion part, but I did roughly follow the structure. So I would be firstly identifying, hey, the principle has, this is the principle that's there in the question or the provision, and it has three distinct elements, A, B, and C, or whatever else is given as the rule. Then I'd think about why the principle is most relevantly when it applies, it leads to this conclusion. Then I talk about some of the counter arguments that, hey, maybe it's out of jurisdiction, maybe there's another person involved,
Other
maybe the
person involved.
link is weaker, maybe the causation might not be the strongest, or maybe there XYZ, maybe it's not foreseeable, and so on. There are a bunch of counter arguments that are always present, and I try to show why either they are not really applicable, or B, they're really less significant than the answers that are presented.
Answers.
So it's not flag posting, issue, rule, application, conclusion. It's usually just
One
the
continuous
principle. Yeah.
paragraph with relevant paragraph. So I think I see students, a lot of students make this mistake, which is primarily that they flag post issue, reasoning, rule, application, conclusion. So one key term that you actually use, this depends a lot on the context. So if the issue is very clearly is that which of the two is guilty, that's a different thing. The issue is per se given. You are to actually highlight issue in instances. Say, for example, if the question is whether or not injunction would be granted in this case, that's the problem. Then the issue becomes that whether or not the act in question constitutes nuisance. So the issue is different. So a lot of students make this mistake that they regurgitate the facts again without realizing that whether or not it is needed in this case or not. So all participants take note. You do not have to go ahead and flag post issue, rule, reasoning, application, conclusion for all your case studies. Read the case studies, make an informed, conscious assessment that if at all you need to highlight these components, these headers separately. Otherwise, make it one continuous passage. Same with rule or reasoning. If the rule is explicitly given in your problem, do not need to regurgitate it again. Until unless you feel that there's something beyond this which you need to highlight then in the rule and not exactly just copy paste what's given in the case study. For this and one question with regard to this, your thoughts and opinions, and did you actually do it in your examination wherein you highlighted important parts in your case studies or your analytical essay?
So, ma'am, again, one clarification. Because I didn't flag post the my issue, rule, application, conclusion. I didn't follow the exact structure. I still tried to just break down the paragraphs. So
Or did you
my
highlight important, say like
yeah.
one argument was important from another, so you highlighted that, so maybe say like underlined in your answer copy?
So I was able to I firstly I prioritized finishing my paper, and I think that's what all students should do.
Yes,
And like
exactly.
highlighting and underlining comes afterwards. I was able to go ahead and highlight at least my analytical essay, because that was, I feel, a lot longer, and because I'm writing a lot of fiction, I'm introducing a quote and a lot of things. So the important arguments kind of get missed out in your essay. So I highlighted the essay. I was able to start ahead with like highlighting or underlining my arguments in one of the answers, and then the time just like
Have enough
started
time.
ringing.
Yes.
So I prioritized them. I thought the underlining didn't really add a lot. I just revised my paper and I submitted it. But I think if students have the time, you should be able to like underline it. I'm not sure if like highlighting it with a colored marker would be the best strategy to go about it, but like at least just underlining it with a black pen would certainly work. It draws emphasis. Don't underline everything. Don't underline too much because then it becomes redundant. Only
Exactly.
the key absolute words of your arguments, especially in your essay, if you're something that you think is particularly important paying attention to. But do not prioritize this at any cost before finishing your paper.
So, I mean, that's what I essentially meant when I use the term highlight, underline. We'll still wait for the admit cards and instructions to be out to fairly, make sense that whether or not you can use different color pens to highlight or underline. Otherwise, just all participants just stick to underlining things that you feel are important and that you would actually want your evaluator to take note, which by no sense means that you end up, all of you must have seen those memes when you've actually highlighted or underlined the entire book, passage, no, extremely relevant and the make or break arguments, basically. Well, Rishabh, this brings me to the last question. I think it's like a very informative session and we discussed a lot of things. Anything that, last minute tips or anything that you would want to suggest all participants, all NLSAT 2026 aspirants, something that mistakes that they should avoid in the last 30 days, things that they should take note of?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Firstly, super important, be aware of the question paper. You have to attempt every single question. Even if you don't know the answer, just attempt the question. You know how the negative marking -1 works if you've read the paper and the PYQs. Don't make very silly mistakes. Secondly, I think for the next 30 days, the most important thing is building your reading speed, building your exam giving, practicing stamina, building a repository of current affairs. I think like if you've only got 30 days to prepare and if you've not at a point where you're only revising for the exam, it would be super helpful to maybe like stay off social media or any sort of digital platforms at this point, because any sort of new information you get from the digital platforms from this point onwards is already not going to be tested on the exam. Like until the end of March is really where the cutoff really is. Try to again not fatigue your mind too much. Just stay active. Don't like just stay cooped up in a room and just drag yourself down. Be really consistent on mocks, even if you can't really go ahead and do your static GK that well. If you really can't like finish all the compendiums you're doing, just mocks and analysis is the number one thing you should prioritize at this point of time. Also, if you like really can get in touch with of course in your coaching you'd already have groups and doubt clearing groups and you'd be able to get in touch with people, but like having focus groups and having support is really important. People like these last 30 days are very crucial. Don't like let yourself drown in anxiety that hey, my all of these topics, these months of worth of GK is not covered. Like just make sure to be in touch with your peers if you can and just like go through it together.
Thank you so much, Rishabh. And for all participants, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to us. I understand a lot of times, I think anxiety kills more potential and the fear of failure kills more potential. So reach out to us, talk to us, and you can definitely make it from here. You just need the right sources, guidance, and a lot of course, hard work and effort from your end. Thank you so much, Rishabh. I think all participants, hope to see them as your juniors this year at NLSAT. Rishabh is a great senior, is always super helpful, and we continue to work on a couple of things just to continue to add that student's perspective to your NLSAT preparation. And on that note, Rishabh, we'll meet again. Thank you so much for this session.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.